Yeah. That could be, yeah, definitely. Not his arguments on death, but there is stuff there. Yes, you're right. Thank you, Patricia.
Well, thank you, Amy. Amazing presentation. It's time to move to our next speaker. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Maria Tillmans. She will be speaking how Parrhesia is at the heart of doing philosophy with children. A little bit about her bio. Iguana Books out of Toronto, Canada has published 3 of her books: Why We Are in Need of Tales, T-A-I-L-S, illustrated by Blair Thornley, and Why We Are in Need of Tales, T-A-L-E-S, Discovering Philosophical Treasures in Picture Books, Part 1 and 2, illustrated with children's drawings. Part 3 and Part 4 are in the process of being published. With Part 4, the series is complete. She is in charge of an international work group with participants from the Netherlands, Norway, Russia, and the UK. The project is focused on embodied philosophical counseling. Dr. Tillmans was philosopher in residence at El Toyan Elementary, an undeserved school in San Diego before the pandemic hit, and at La Jolla Country Day School, a private school. She has conducted philosophy with teen programs. She has taught at the University of California, San Diego for 10 years in the teacher education program, now the Educational Studies Department, Human Development Program, and Communication Department, as well as at UCSD Extension. For 8 years, from 2005 to 2013, Dr. Tillmans was the field representative for the Professional Union of Non-Senate Faculty, 200 faculty, and librarians, consisting of 40 librarians, also at UCSD. Dr. Tillmans received her doctorate from the University of Illinois in 1998. Her dissertation, Philosophical Counseling and Teaching, Holding the Tension in a Dualistic World, is published by ProQuest. In Holland, she conducted a philosophy for children program at 2 international schools in the early 90s. Ron Lahav and Dr. Tillmans co-edited Essays on Philosophical Counseling, published in 1995, which is an excellent text. She has publications in Dutch, British, American, Russian, South Korean journals. From 1996 to 97, Dr. Tillmans was president of the American Society for Philosophy, Counseling, and Psychotherapy, now the NPCA, National Philosophical Counseling Association. Dr. Tillmans and her husband conducted a biweekly Socratic dialogue group from 2002 to 2007 with inmates at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, while he was employed as a prison chaplain. In 2005, Dr. Tillmans was invited by Princess Irene of the Netherlands to discuss her work on dialogue. Welcome, Dr. Tillmans.
Thank you. So let me see. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to all the presenters. And this is my, a statement that could be taken in different ways, positive or negative, but I feel that this conference has been one of the most inspirational that I have attended in all these years. And I am very grateful for the young talent. I've been involved with philosophical counseling, I guess since 1979 in one form or another, and with philosophy with children. But the older I get, the younger are my friends and the younger are my colleagues. And I am very inspired and excited by the direction that new talent is moving into. So I really had to say that. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Let me see if this will work. Basic Safari. See. Files. desktop 1. Let's see. I don't know. I don't see it coming up. Maybe I'll need some help with this. I did send it to Sam and Elliot. Is it possible for you to share it for me?
Which email did you send it to?
I will do it. I have it at hand. Okay.
Oh, great. Thank you. Because it did say desktop 1, but okay. Thank you so much. So Parrhesia, there we go, I feel is at the heart of doing philosophy with children. Let's see, is there any way that I can click it, or do you need to click it? So Parrhesia first appeared in Greek literature in the 5th century, and generally it refers to the notion of speaking freely and frankly. But what does that really mean, freely and frankly? It's really speaking one's own sense of truth in the face of those who have power. And in that, there lies a real strong danger, because it's really a form of speaking truth to power. So in a way, it really puts you in a position where you're very vulnerable, because it's your personal truth, your subjective truth, that you're actually putting on the line. So Parrhesia was also devised to give one the license to speak freely without fearing for his or her life, because it was a way for a person in a position of power to learn the truth about something from someone in a subordinate position without being considered insubordinate. So Parrhesia, in that sense, changes the dynamic between the sovereign and the subordinate. So in that particular moment, the power structure has changed. So instead of the sovereign or the teacher or the parent being in control and being the one who has the power, it has been reversed. So now the power lies with the person who is now in a position to speak their truth. Changing the dynamic, the order of things, like the regular power structure, is then quintessential. Yeah. Doing philosophy with children creates the opportunity for children to in this way, learn about their own sense of truth. And it is when doing it with children that changes the dynamic of the adult-child relationship, or the teacher, the parent-child relationship. For example, in a class I did, where the teacher was very excited and she always joins the group, but this is 2nd grade. And she had a particular view, and I asked the child sitting next to me, do you agree with Mrs. Toledo? Whereupon the child said, oh no, I totally disagree with Miss Toledo. So again, it was in this particular setting that he wouldn't be, sent back to his desk or get a timeout because he totally disagreed with his teacher's opinion. It was a safe space in which the child could speak his or her, in this case, his personal truth, and learn about his own truth in the process. Yeah. It really requires courage because you go against, as I mentioned before, the order of things. And whether you're granted the freedom to speak freely or not, because you know how things are in the order of things. And so also for a child to speak out really means that the child has to feel safe, or in philosophical counseling, that the client feels safe. And I mentioned it in a Q&A before with one of the speakers, where I mentioned philosophizing about a dream with a client. And I mentioned something to a certain effect, and the client turned around and said, "Oh no, Maria, you got that all wrong." So again, she is in a position to correct the so-called expert that she's come to see. So Parrhesia can be used for ill and express bold and ignorant arrogance, evil, perhaps. But Parrhesia therefore has to be linked to good education, to intellectual formation, and moral fortitude, as Plutarch would say. Self-scrutiny in the form of practicing Parrhesia with oneself is to be able to witness one's own thoughts and feelings, to take that distance, I think, that Susan was talking about, instead of simply having them. And having them and identifying with them in an unexamined way. So with our unexamined habits, minds, and thought processes, as David Bohm would say. So instead of simply identifying with them and taking them as truth and for granted, this is sort of the facts and this is the way it is, that you're able to push back. And I think what was interesting, and I did want to mention this to Ross Reed, is that when Susan said that he, in a sense, mirrored anger to her, and that she then came to realize, hey, how come he's angry and I'm not? And I think that was a very key point, I think, also pivotal for maybe the whole philosophical counseling session, because in a sense, he mirrored being a witness, which he was then also able to internalize. This is my sense. So please correct me if I misunderstood that. So self-awareness, the examined life, helps to bring our logos, our thinking, in line with our bios. This is the way we live our life. Yeah. Socrates performs the role of basanos, or touchstone, enabling him to determine the true nature of the relation between logos and bios in his interlocutors. And so that's where he can also show that what they think they know, they don't really know, because the logos and the bios are out of sync. And I think it also creates then hopefully some kind of awareness that it is important, imperative, to bring logos and bios together, and to realize that we're actually working in a world where they're separated or even disconnected. I contend that in children, the bios and logos relation is still one. Their logos is their bios. Children speak from their whole being. Only as they grow up do the two become separated or even disconnected. When doing philosophy with children, Parrhesia focuses on this logos-bios relation in children. I think some practitioners in philosophy for children focus solely or mainly on the logos, developing good critical thinking skills. It's all very much, it's still in the head. But I think that's what they basically also learn in school, that they have to develop their logos. And then we come in doing philosophy for kids. And in some cases, I see us not doing very much different. So again, it's developing the logos with, in this case, philosophical critical thinking skills. But Parrhesia for me means that the child develops their own basanas or touchstone, their own sense of truth, through self-scrutiny and self-reflection. And this is what's so interesting when you do with young kids, and I work in elementary school, is that the children have not yet really taken on positions. Their thoughts and ideas are still very flexible and fluid, and they can easily change their minds if they hear someone else saying something that makes more sense to them. And so they then can also reflect back, and why did I think that in the first place? Or so it's still a process that doesn't, it's almost like cement in a cement truck. Strange analogy. My dad was an architect, but where the cement in the truck is still rolling and rolling. Once you pour it out and it becomes hard, if you want to change it, you really have to chop it, break it down, which is a very difficult process. But in this fluid stage, they can experiment, they can play with different ideas. And so I build on this whole notion of play that is so present in children, and we would need to have that more with adults too. So self-scrutiny and self-reflection, yeah. When a child develops their basanos or touchstone, they solidify the grounding in the logos-bios relation. And I think that is very essential because it prevents the disconnect between the two later on in life. The two might go separate ways in some sense, but it will not necessarily lead to a complete disconnect, where I think a lot of trouble originates and people go to therapy or philosophical counseling or what have you, or medical doctor because they have physical symptoms. When Darren Chetty talks about the gated community of inquiry, he's essentially referring to the acceptance of reality whose prevailing notions are left unexamined. But an examined life requires a basanos or touchstone by which we examine reality as we were, wait a minute, the examined life requires that we examine the reality we are taught as children and enculturated into. So the basanos, so we are enculturated in to understand reality a certain way, but now we have a basanos or touchstone by which we can actually examine it. Yeah? Aporia means puzzlement or wonderment, referring to the idea of being at a loss. Aporia and aporia questions in a philosophy with children discussion appeal to the children's own basanos to wrestle with puzzling questions. And they're puzzling questions because they don't have a particular answer. Of course, there are better answers, worse answers, and we have to examine that, of course. But there's not just one answer that they're used to giving in a regular classroom setting. So they really do have to appeal to their own sense of truth. What do I think about this? So Parrhesia allows them to speak freely and frankly from their own touchstones of reality. In turn, this develops a sense of self-possession, self-confidence, and self-esteem. And I think that is the basis for true independent thinking, not necessarily just being very well equipped in logical arguments and critical thinking. So when children enter into dialogue, operating from their own sense of truth, they're also now required to listen to the sense of truth of their peers. So then you create a group of true dialogue. This creates not a debate, and they're not arguing, they're actually really listening and considering each other's ideas and maybe changing their minds if they hear a peer come up with an idea that they never thought of and might be a better idea. This creates a venue for true speaking and listening, effectively blurring the line between the two. The perplexity that ensues now has to find a way to be integrated into a broader sense of reality. So it's not just a cacophony of everybody's opinion. It's not just every opinion goes. It's not just falling into some sense of relativity. So children are quick to then re-examine their views and often feel free to change their mind because we do want to get a better or deeper understanding of what we're discussing and not just have an array of different opinions, okay? So here was an example. I'll just read the story. Grasshopper's going down the road when he sees a bunch of beetles carrying signs that say that they love morning. The beetles are morning lovers and celebrate morning every morning. When they see Grasshopper, they ask him whether he likes morning, and he says he does. The beetles are thrilled and make him part of their We Love Morning Club. They give him a wreath, sign to carry, but things go terribly wrong when Grasshopper announces that he also loves afternoon and night. The beetles are shocked and they rip the wreath from him, take away his sign. Nobody who loves afternoon and night can be in our club. And Grasshopper continues on the road, and it's morning and he sees the dew sparkle in the sunlight. So my first question is to the group, is it okay for the beetles to throw Grasshopper out of the club? And some say yes. Beetles have a right to determine the rules of their We Love Morning Club. Some say no, because he was not made aware of the rules and he loves morning, after all. Aporia question, is it fair to throw Grasshopper out of the club? Is it fair? The question now moves to the question of fairness. And now we also move to the individual children's notion of the truth about fairness, their own individual basanos touchstone of what it means to be fair. What would it be? What would be fair? How do we know what's fair? How do we determine what's fair? And some of the children said that it was even rude to throw Grasshopper. It was the beetles being rude that made that it was not fair. Children now participate by speaking from their own sense of truth, of what it means to them to be fair. Holding the tension is a notion that was done or came to be through Maurice Friedman, a renowned Martin Buber scholar. And it's the ability to counteract dichotomous either or thinking, or in any attempt to synthesize thought into unity or fusion. So it's really reducing thinking to sort of either or black and white thinking, very dualistic. So one student complained in this discussion that we had that she did not find it fair that she should clean her brother's room as well as her own. So ultimately, she does not fall into the dichotomous either or thinking of either rejecting her family's values or her own sense of truth of what is fair. She can hold the tension between the two realities, two now, behind what's considered fair, her family's and her own. She may follow the family's rules, but not by rejecting her own sense of truth. She has developed the self-awareness whereby giving her a sense of empowerment and sense of ownership of her own thoughts to think for herself. And this is when she or the children have developed a sense of empowerment, sense of ownership of their own thoughts and feelings, which forms the basanos, then whatever they encounter in life can be questioned and put to the test by the basanos that has been created. Holding the tension allows her to respect her family's values while respecting her own touchstone of reality as well. She's now in a position to hold on to her bios-logos relation while responding to the reality around her as she sees fit. So she's in charge of her own thinking, becoming a truly empowered, independent thinker. Without developing the self-scrutiny developed through practicing Parrhesia with oneself, she would likely leave the prevailing reality unexamined. And that's why I feel that Parrhesia is really at the heart, or is the heart, of doing philosophy with children. It changes the power dynamic, and it gives children the power and empowers them to speak freely and frankly from their own bios-logos relations, discover it and experience it, and through the experience can hold on to it. Otherwise, it just gets sucked away from them. They're now taught how to think, how to be in society, what their parents, their community, their schools have taught them, all at the expense of their own power of thinking. So when Parrhesia is practiced with oneself, it leads to self-scrutiny and then self-possession, empowering the child to think truly independently. So for me, Parrhesia fosters true independent thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that really excellent and interesting presentation. I love the topic of philosophy with children. This was really, really amazing. So we have some time now for questions, about 20 minutes. Who would like to ask a question, make a comment? Okay, Antonio?
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It's really amazing. I mean, it's really a difficult thing considering the idea of philosophy with children. Lots of people have there are different views, and it's difficult to find, I mean, the real way to go at the core of it. And I totally agree that you got it. And actually, thinking about even the genesis of Parrhesia itself, you see a huge change also in, let's say, in the how it was like, we could say, at the beginning properly of philosophy and then after. Just think about, for example, the Pythagorean model. The Pythagoras just opened his discussion, opened his lecture just saying something like, by the air I breathe and the water I drink, I won't tolerate to be interrupted or annoyed, something like this. So it was properly the classical model. It's like, I speak, you shut up, you just listen and get whatever you got. So in this case, I mean, it's really the introduction of Paris itself changed completely the paradigm, and the fact that you found a way to see for children directly and to do it from a younger age in order that they may develop in time the skill. It's definitively something that.
And I want to add that the teachers I've worked with really enjoy this. So when the child said, "Oh no, I totally disagree with Miss Toledo," she was grinning from ear to ear. I mean, so it also gives the teacher a whole new idea of who these young thinking beings are around her. So she also starts seeing them not just as subjects that need to be taught, although that's certainly not the way these teachers teach to begin with. That's why I love being there. But it gives them even more confirmation to be their natural selves with the children too. And so that creates an environment where learning is co-learning, co-creating, where teachers can be corrected by students. And I would say too, like, man, I never thought of that before. This is brilliant. So it becomes a very different type of environment in the end.
Well, absolutely. I think that, I mean, it's probably the main dynamic, as you were saying, of the inversion, we could say, of the role between the, like, what was expected to be like the subordinate that just change and the different. I think it's even from an anthropological perspective. Just think about like different mechanisms in societies that do have this kind of things of inversions, like the period of carnivals sometimes is like where people just simply switching the roles, or traditions of heyokas in for Native Americans. That actually they just do everything at the contrary, and there is this kind of inversion, and it's from there that it starts this kind of enrichment and exchange. While instead, if there are like just a decided rule, this change doesn't happen. So
Well, and it can take away an element of threat. So if you let women speak their own truth, instead of being threatened by women, men can say, hey, that's actually interesting. Or if you have this, this sort of stupid notion of reverse discrimination, well, it really just means your privilege was taken away, nothing more. But then whole new doors can open up. And you can, it becomes such a far more richer environment when you include the basanos of other people.
absolutely, totally agree. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments?
I would like to say something from my experience as a student in philosophical practice. As you know, we probably know we have this master program in West University of Timisoara, which focuses on philosophical practices, and we have at least 4 semesters of philosophy for children. And there's a nice practice set up to let us collaborate with certain classes in certain schools so that we learn a little bit about what it's like to work with children. And the impact was amazing. The Romanian school focuses very much on reproducing knowledge. So students are rewarded for saying what the teacher said in the previous lesson. And there tends to be a discrepancy between those that are considered the best students, who always get all the attention, and the worst students, those who are generally left behind. And what happened in these consultations was shocking for the students as well as for the teachers, because we could see some of the best students that went silent. They could not speak up their minds. They really had no ideas because their vasos, it was just basanos, it was just suppressed.
Yes,
They were trying hard to just reproduce what others were saying. So they went silent in these consultations where they were asked to provide their own points of view, or they
sense
just
of
didn't
truth.
say anything. Exactly. And then there were the worst students who just were coming alive. Finally, they were raising their hands. They were making interesting contributions to which the teacher was making faces like, really? You are speaking? The shy students came forth and said things in a shy way, but they said things. And then another very interesting observation was that the bullies were respectful. I didn't know they were the bullies of the class. We were just talking with everybody and collecting their points of view. And those were just some kids who had a fair point of view. So they got some appreciation for their idea. And they were so proud. And the teacher told me, I can't believe the bullies spoke in such respectful way and did not throw jokes or did not do something violent against the methodology or others speaking. So I thought there was quite a revolution happening just because the environment was created as a place where they could speak their truth and have the attention of the others, examining their ideas and really considering them.
And the nice thing is that if you do this, you come to school and do this kind of session, then it starts to ripple. You get a ripple effect. So then it also plays out in other situations in the classroom, in other communications with the teachers, on the playground. And so it builds on itself. So you initially set up the environment, but over a longer period of time, it takes time. Then it ripples out, which is very nice. And then I'm hoping that maybe once upon a time, much far into the future, and I've been dead for decades, that maybe government can have a way of operating in a similar vein where they're not threatened and just taking positions and digging in, but can freely and frankly speak with each other.
Would be great. Actually, I have a question for you if you wish to elaborate a bit. What do you think about parrhesia in adults? Do you think adults are, for some reason, reluctant to tell the truth on
I think
sort
they
of-
often don't know the truth because it's
Yeah,
already
yeah.
been separated.
Oh.
They haven't developed their own basanos. And that's why I think they feel threatened, because if they had developed it, they would be eager to share. But now they're put on the spot. They adopted as their own a touchstone that has been created within the society or community or family that they live in. And so I think that's where a place where they start feeling threatened, because they're not speaking from their own sense of truth. And that's where I think it becomes, and that's where it politically it becomes such a problem too. And I think that if you give chance, that's why you work with little ones when the bios logos is still connected, in my opinion. And then they develop that basanos, that touchstone, and they hold on to it. So you can't take it away. They're still acculturated in the society and so forth. So that doesn't stop happening, but at least they have a touchstone with which to push back or to accept and to question. And so it's not necessarily that they either only follow their own ideas or just fall in with what everybody else thinks. So I think it's hard for adults now because they were never given the opportunity to develop their own. Now, of course, there are adults that have. So, but I think they're, in comparison, they're far and few between. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, and it as well raises another about what ways can we use to bring that voice back to the adults and put them back in touch with their capacity for parrhesia.
Well, again, if you are in the philosophical counseling setting where the client was able to say, Maria, you're all wrong. That's not the way it is. And I go, oh, okay, shit, I'll have to think of something else. So you can play with humor too. A lot of people are afraid that they won't be the expert anymore if you play around like that, but it empowers the client. The client says, wow, I've been in therapy, but the philosophical counseling, I'm in the driver's seat. I get to decide if we turn right or left. And so, and they also then develop a sense of strong responsibility, and the kids too, a responsibility for what they're actually saying, that it matters, because for one, somebody's really listening, and so it matters. So you better be careful what you say. You just can't be flippant about it. And so I think that also creates a deeper sense of responsibility, because you're going to be held accountable for that basanos of yours.
Antonio.
That was just a quick note on this, because I say how you do it like with adults. Of course, adults have already consolidated, we could say, their way of thinking, but at the same time, philosophical literature, especially we could say the apophthegmata, the anecdotes of lives, gives us some really interesting examples in this, like the story that Diogenes, there was like a man who wanted to follow him, and he just gave him a piece of cheese to bring with him at the market. And then, I mean, this man just refused, left the cheese and left away. And Diogenes later explained to him that it was one of this way. It was probably the idea to let him do something that would have allowed him to realize how his preconception would have been wrong. So in order to say that this is something that, hey, you can do, but this is something I remember, like Dr. Cohen as well mentioned an example like this. The one of the, it was of the pink bag or of the pink coat. I don't remember this stuff. The idea to overcome the shame in this case, and to realize that there is nothing wrong, and that you can change the way you think about the things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then take away the shame, you also don't have to, the added pressure of saving face, because so much comes from
Exactly.
having to save face in a community within your community, within your family. And so then all the defensive come up, and all the excuses and explanations and all the fallacies and thinking, because, you know, we feel threatened.
Exactly.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and that goes to Ivan.
All right. Well, it's actually not a question, but a comment, but I typed question rather than a comment. It was too late. But I just want to comment on what the Anka and Antonio and well, Maria, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just thinking that, you know, what's going on with adults and whether we can do with adults this, there's a sense in which there's already some efforts, like, for example, I mean, we've been focusing mostly on philosophical counseling in this conference, but there's also this broader notion of philosophical practice, which is also involves, you know, works with groups, right? So there's the notion of the philosophical cafe, for example, where, you know, holding these philosophical cafes, where you just invite the members of the community, and you try not to make the philosopher or whoever is conducting the philosophical cafes, they're facilitators, they're not pontificators.
Right.
And so you try to control for that power relation, and also, you know, try to avoid, you know, overly technical philosophical language, so people can speak for themselves. So there's adults come and they gather and they, you know, around a philosophical issue, and they start sharing their views, and then maybe that notion of Parrhesia is emerging there as well. I mean, and so I'm not sure. And so I've seen that, and it can work, right? I mean, I haven't done it myself, but I've seen it, and I have attended some philosophical cafes. There is also, I mean, I would just, you know, just remind me, like, Michael Sandel, which is, you know, political philosopher at Harvard. You know, he's been trying to conduct for a long time, conducted this kind of Socratic dialogues, you know, with bunch of people around the world, mostly focused around the notion of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And he even invited politicians, you know, and he hasn't done it in the United States. He did it in Europe. I mean, I cannot imagine Republicans and Democrats right now. They're so polarized, but you know, he's done it in Europe and England, in various countries, where brought politicians, and there was something like this Parrhesia moment emerged there, after they're kind of like bracketed their own, you know, their own, you know, masks and their own political, you know, hardened political identities, and they just started develop, you know, speaking for themselves, you know, from the point of view of these you know, these Basanos that you're talking about. Well, at least they were trying to do that in some way. At some point, he developed in that direction. I'm not sure if it was exactly what you're talking about, but
well, yeah,
there's been attempts.
An example we had at when my husband at the time, being a prison chaplain, and I did the Socratic dialogue groups with the inmates. And at some point we brought in serious literature, nothing was dumbed down. And at some point we brought in Viktor Frankl, you know, to create meaning within, you know, the situation that they are in. And there was one inmate at some point who, I'll make the story short, who said, you know, I really respect that you bring in Viktor Frankl, and they've read the passage that we asked them to read, because I came in every 2 weeks, so they had time to read and think about it. And he said, but there's one huge difference. The people in the concentration camps were innocent. I'm guilty. And he just said it. And the entire group was just silent, because he felt he could say that, because that's often the last thing people will admit to, as you know, Sam's example was alluding to as well. And so, but now, because they were critical thinkers in the sense that it was critical, their life and death depended on it. It was critical. And so it was critical to say the truth for their truth. And so I think that's where there's also a time where you become now in control of your self-possession and true independent thinker, regardless of outside. And that is very empowering. And I think that's also where inmates can make real decisions for how they want to move forward. And it's interesting, just like with what Anka said about the shy students or those that never speak. I had that too, where the teachers say, well, I never hear them speak. And now, you know, and it's very often that they also are, sometimes can be the most insightful. They can come up with, you know, real ideas that they have thought about. And so they don't just have the culture of power, the power of culture, as Antonia Darder was talking about, and Lisa Delpit, but their personal power. They can now speak from a place of personal power. And that is very, you know, very important that children develop that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tillmans, for that really interesting presentation. Thank you all for those questions.
And thank you for staying up so late. Oh, it's only midday here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the end of our conference. And I think it was just so excellent. I can't say.
Me too.
I want to thank everyone for all the hard work and emotional and intellectual energy put into your papers. It's just amazing. I've got so much to learn. I don't think I have any more thoughts. I think Elliot has some things to say.
I just wanted to say that we've been meeting with the NPCA since 1992, and when I reflect back and I think of all the conferences and meetings that we've had, this by far is the richest, and most diverse and spirited.
It's inspiring.
Yes, I'm incredibly inspired personally, and much appreciated. You know, all the labor, you know, and the enthusiasm and contributions that were made here. I mean, there's so much to think about, you know, in moving forward. And I want to echo Sam's thank you, you know, to everybody here. There's nothing more I can say, but this was wonderful. And I think you're all wonderful. So,
well, thanks for giving us that opportunity. Really.
Yeah.
You're quite welcome.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Great.
I really enjoyed it. Excuse me, I have no voice again. But I am so impressed. I'm really appreciate being part of the group. And so, yeah.
I hope we'll all keep in touch.
The quality of it, everyone's paper was so high, and yeah. So thank you, Elliot and Sam.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me. Well, I learned a tremendous amount of, you know, from everybody.
So have I. So
Yeah. And also I had a lot of fun, and my little dog had a lot of fun. She's a little mini pin, but she just ran away. She said, I need some food, but okay.